Hello and welcome. War and Peace is a really special classic. There's a reason why it's on pretty much every classics list you can find, and why it's talked about so much, why it's discussed so much, why so many scholars and academics really dig into it. There's so much to this. It really is a masterpiece of a classic, of a mentoring experience. Because when you're getting into classics, these epics that are just huge, there's special mentoring. Again, I mean, you can get big books that aren't good, huge series that aren't any good, right? But when you get something that really is that impactful, that makes that much of a ripple effect, that catches so many different types and countries and nations and viewpoints, so much attention that people want to think about it and dig into it, seek to understand it and read it and review it because they learn so much from it. Again, there's got to be something there, right? There's a lot of worth and a lot of value there for us to dig into, to pay the price to get through it, and to seek the mentoring that Tolstoy is looking to teach us and to share with us. That doesn't mean you have to agree with him. It doesn't mean that everything he's saying is spot on or correct or right. And sometimes there's a lot of debate on, say, what is he actually trying to say? And that's a lot of fun. But that first foundational approach of understanding what the message is saying to me and how do I live my life because I've read this book is one of the more important lessons we can learn. And so if you're an academic, dig in. Look at Tolstoy. Dig into the text. What is he really trying to say and asking that. But on the leadership side as well, don't forget that it has incredible life lessons for each and every single one of us. So with that, let's dive into these 7 lessons. There's a lot more than just 7 that you can find in an epic like this, especially written by Tolstoy. But here are 7 lessons that I felt like were really important and really powerful about homeschooling, about life, about success in leadership, education, that I wanted to pull out and share with you guys today. So the first 2, I'm going to kind of conglomerate them together because we'll be bouncing back and forth between the 2, is war and peace. Go figures, right? The title page right there. You're already looking at, all right, war and peace. So we have an idea what this book is going to be about. And it goes back and forth. Different scenes, different points in history where we're at war and different points where we're at peace, different scenes again where the nation might be at war, but then it still internally it looks like it's in peace. And so it's just this interesting dichotomy. And right there on the title page, we're looking at world history, and it's full of times of war and times of peace, right? So you have war where something's broken or something's changing, or you have a problem that has to be solved. And there's a contention, there's a struggle, there's chaos, if you will, going on, whether it's kind of selected in a certain group or a certain area, or whether it's kind of widespread and a whole nation is involved in this conflict. So that's kind of war. This is the foundational idea that Tolstoy is discussing and digging into. And then you have peace, which is the other half of this idea that he's thinking about and discussing, where you have more growth. It's a time of strengthening. It's a time of stillness. It's a time of confidence. So the interesting thing that he does throughout this book, because it's during the Napoleonic Wars, right? So the War and Peace is set several years before Tolstoy was alive, but he was pretty close living his life. He was fairly close to the Napoleonic Wars, and so there's still people that he could have known as a boy who were in these wars, who lived during that time. And so he has a fairly close connection to what was happening, what was the culture and the nature of the events. And it's interesting how he wrote this story, because he has a really powerful perspective and a really powerful message to share on history. And we'll get into a couple of these. I'm getting a little bit excited, a little bit ahead of myself, just because this idea of war and peace ties into all these other lessons and into our everyday lives. Because one of the first things he opens up with is a period of peace just before the Napoleonic Wars happens, except that there's some individuals and a few relationships that are at war. They're not in peace. And so he opens up this book with internal war and peace, which often leads to external war and peace. Or sometimes the external war and peace turns the internal into more contention. And how do you find peace with these external things that we don't have control over? And so it's this really powerful opening. The first time through it, I didn't catch this. I didn't understand this. I was looking for, all right, here's the war scenes where they take the muskets and they go marching through, you have your generals and your soldiers, and then you have times of peace where you're in society, or it's in the break between the two Napoleonic wars. And so you do have times of peace. You're not marching soldiers. And so I was stuck in that box of thinking of war and peace. And it wasn't until quite a ways through the book where I was realizing, where Tolstoy finally hit me with it over the head. Do you get it now? Where I finally realized, like, oh, one of the big aspects of this, yes, it's the external war and peace. That has a huge impact on individuals, has huge impact on history, has a huge impact on nations and societies. But the things that have just as big of impact is each individual's journey, the war and peace within ourselves. So that's a very important piece, the external war and peace and the internal war and peace. Those are the first two of these 7 lessons from War and Peace. The third one that ties into this external and internal struggle is Inner Ringism. So C.S. Lewis wrote an essay building off of this book. He takes just one little clip, if you will, just 1 or 2 paragraphs from the book, and then expounds and explains this concept, this principle that Tolstoy was teaching. Because Tolstoy has several sections. He goes on and on talking about Inner Ringism. So the basic definition, if you haven't read C.S. Lewis's essay, it's really short and it is absolutely brilliant. You should absolutely go and find that and read that. You should also read War and Peace, because reading the essay, you'll get the understanding, the concept. Well, I'm going to define it for you really quick, and so you'll have basically what the essay says, but he'll go through and walk you through it in a way that only C.S. Lewis really can. And so you'll understand the concept, but then when you read War and Peace, and you go through it with Tolstoy, you go through it with these characters, you experience it. You don't just learn about it, you really get into the trenches and you experience. You are doing Inner Ringism to the characters themselves, and then you'll go through the process, the mentored process that Tolstoy's taking you through, and hopefully by the end you end up as a sound craftsman, not in an inner ring. The book, War and Peace, is like a master class in Inner Ringism. It really is a powerful mentoring. So what does it mean? Inner ring basically means you want to be in the in crowd, the cool crowd, and it only really exists by exclusion. You're not in it, I am. And so you have to be able to be entered into this inner ring. You have to be something special. You have to be accepted as the cool kid, or you have to force your way in more often than not. But then there's always a ring inside of it, and a ring inside of it, and a ring inside of it. It's empty, it's hollow, it's just a ring. It's not a full circle, it's not whole, it's not accepting, it's not really friendship. It's just aggrandizement, and it's glory seeking. So it's a very selfish state of mind. It's a very selfish community. And it's not always that it's horrible and evil inherently, although evil tends to reside in ringism. But it's like, again, it's the cool kids at school or in your community. It's the bullies. It's whatever is that kind of clique that exists for the sake of excluding others, for being better than others, or for having something that others don't have. So again, it's generally self-centered. And by the end of the essay, Lewis argues that the proper state of being is gaining mastery in something, is being a sound craftsman. The example, the juxtaposition he gives to it is being a circle, where you are in a circle, where a circle is whole, not just a flimsy ring, not just an emptiness, but a whole circle, where you might be the greatest orchestra in the world, and there is a natural exclusion. It's by merit, not by relationship, hierarchy, and hoity-toity, something along those lines. It is a natural separation. It's not selfish, and they're very open to others. They love others, and they're willing for others to accomplish the level of practice and devotion and exercise and work that they've put into it to gain a certain level of mastery of something, where this violinist really is one of the greatest in the world. And me, who I've played a few years of the viola, I'm just not cut out for it, And you can go and do tryouts, and they continue to work and train. So I could get there if I put in the time and the effort and the work needed to gain that level of mastery, sure. But it's not excluding me just because they don't like me, or because if they let me in too easily, then ring loses its power. It loses its substance, because if it's so easy to get into the cool crowd, then everybody's cool, and then I'm not cooler than you, and so you can't have that, right? But sound craftsmen are very excited and open for others to do the work, to pay the price, and to become excellent themselves, and to welcome them in with open arms, saying, congratulations, that is hard work what you just did. This is a special group of those who have mastery in this area. Or seeing other people recognizing, hey, I have mastery here and you have mastery there. I recognize that. That is hard work and you've paid the price, and that is special. I am excited and I respect you and I'm proud of you for accomplishing mastery there. So that's the basic juxtaposition, and how many words I used to explain that was about half of the essay that C.S. Lewis wrote. And again, it's amazing. If you haven't been through it, go read it, please. And then War and Peace, there's the several scenes during, especially the war times, where, again, there's going to be a lot of spoilers through this. I forgot to give the heads up at the very beginning, the caveat. What's the word I'm looking for, you guys? The disclaimer. That's the word. Thank you. I heard you guys yelling at me through the camera, through the computer. So the disclaimer I have this is going to have lots of spoilers if you haven't read it yet, but it's a really big book and I can't possibly give all the spoilers. So it's worth it to go through it, to listen to it, to get excited, to learn these little tidbits, and then go look for them in the book. Hopefully this will be, if you haven't read it, to be motivation to go through the book. And if you have read it but maybe didn't love it, then hopefully this will be good chunks and good pieces to go through and review it, to read it again, and to fall in love with this experience. Or maybe you set it down and said, man, this is too much randomness, just too much story, and it doesn't seem like it means anything. Go try it again. There is so much in there when you go through that journey, that mentoring arc that Tolstoy is taking us through. There's a reason why you're going through the experiences and seeing the scenes and the society that you're being invited to experience with him. There's reasons why it's as long as it is and why he includes what he does. It's very formulated, and it really is very specific. So, what are we talking about? Inner Ringism, that's right. So we've got 1, war and chaos. Lesson 2 is the peace and order. Lesson 3 is the inner ring. So one of the characters, again, I'm going to try to stray away from names so that you can see if you can guess and figure it out for yourself as you're reading it. One of the characters joins the military in the Napoleonic Wars. He's Russian. And he quickly recognizes that the military, obviously, has ranks. And the higher ranks gives order, and the lower ranks are supposed to follow through and obey those orders, right? But as he's different positions, as a counselor, as an adjunct, and in different leadership positions in the military, he gets to sit in on the councils, not always invited to share his opinion, but he does have the ear of generals and different commanders. And eventually he gets the support, the approval, and the respect of many of the generals, and they start listening to him. They let him have a voice. But it was really interesting because he recognizes pretty early on the politics at play with the generals, of the different inner rings that are being formed and created, and the glory that these different gentlemen are seeking, that who gets credit and how it's spoken of. Whereas this gentleman, he's there because it's for his king and his nation. He's there to defend invaders and to help their neighbors, to help their allies from this invasion, from this conqueror. And so he says, why does it matter who gets the credit? Let's have the success. Let's have the victory. That's far more important. Let's give the success and the credit to our country, to the soldiers who are fighting this with these armchair generals who aren't in the thick of things. And so his viewpoint was to get into the trenches, to get in with the men to help fulfill the orders. There's a time when he comes in and they're supposed to get the cannons out. These cannons weren't given the order properly. There was some confusion because war is chaos. He finally recognizes something and he talks to his general and he runs off and gives the order. And he recognizes that they're not going to be able to make the retreat fast enough before the French army comes and takes over. So he stays and helps them to retreat and making sure that they hear it and understand, because the other guy yelled, hey, you're supposed to move, and then he runs off and under the cannon fire and everything. They didn't hear, they didn't understand, and so they were just sitting there doing their duty, holding the line, because they knew if they didn't hold their line, then they would be able to flank and they would be able to sweep over the rest of the army. So they had a very pivotal role in the whole of the army. They just didn't know all the different moving pieces that were currently going on. So this character, he stops and he makes sure that they understand, and then he helps them go through the retreat, and he sticks with them until they are back into safety. And so with this approach that he has, which is very different from the different leaders that we see, and you see that there are multiple characters, side characters, and people that he starts building this friendship and these connections with. He's starting to build a sound craftsman circle rather than an inner ring seeking for glory and merit. And he gains the respect, and he regains the reverence, and he gains the ear of many important and influential leaders in the army, because he's not seeking self-glory. He's seeking the widespread success of his king, of his country, of the army, and of surviving through the war. And so people recognize that, and they feel safe around him. They know he's going to give good advice. And so he learns that, yes, there is a rank hierarchy, but there's also this other invisible hierarchy. And so this is where C.S. Lewis pulling this from, where some lieutenant or some general comes walking in on him while he's having a conversation with somebody who's lower rank. And the general has to wait for this character because they're not on the battlefield. He's not giving orders. And so it's outside of that rank hierarchy. And the invisible hierarchy is the one that tends to govern and to rule. Now, in the peacetime scenes and situations that we're in, we see that playing all the time. We see that in full effect within society itself, as we're visiting with neighbors, as we're working within family, as we're struggling with our own self-confidence and our own, what is right, what are we supposed to do, and how do we go about living everyday life. There's these different rings and circles and groups in society where those, you can tell the gossipers, and you can tell those of society who aren't real, who are fake, who put up a facade, and then you see those who are real. And again, you can have people in both categories who are good and bad, who have good motives and who have bad motives. And it's amazing when you get to know these characters, you get to know these families. There are a lot of families, a lot of different names and people that Tolstoy puts into his book. There are so many people. But doing that, again, it's more than just, oh, here's the principle, here's an idea, and he gives a little blurb or a little scene about it. You experience it. You are part of it. You go through the ups and downs. You say, oh, why is he doing that so ridiculous? And sit back and say, oh, I just did that same thing at church this last week, or at this community meeting, or with my neighbor, or with my family over Thanksgiving, or something along those lines, right? Say, oh, I'm totally doing this inner ring approach. But this person over here, even though he's not very good, I don't like him very much, he's doing the sound craftsman, the circle approach, and he's not being fake. He is approaching it with realism and honesty and being himself. And so, all right, so now we get to look at these because we've experienced it, we've felt it, we've argued with them, and now we get to look and, all right, now we get to pick through and see who we want to pattern after, and pulling the good out of those that, pulling the good out of everybody and recognizing the bad in everybody and trying to then develop those in ourselves. Let me qualify that. To develop the good and to remove the bad. That's what I mean by develop. You don't want to develop if we get better at the bad aspects of ourselves, right? And so this aspect, these lessons, this mentoring that we get to live through, we get to experience and be a little bit more objective within a book like this. You really do experience both the war and the peace. You experience it in a very powerful and deep way, where you then start seeing it in yourself and in how you interact with people around you. Just because you'll start seeing similar habits and similar trends and similar things that, again, people in the real world that they do, that Tolstoy is able to take the time to walk you through in the book. The fourth lesson is building off, because the inner ring is largely focused on self, on how you interact with other people, how you create or how you build your relationships in society. But it really does flow out. You get rings of communities or businesses, companies, and nations also play into this role of inner ringism versus a sound craftsman. And we see this play out in history, on national scales, down to the individual up to worldwide. And it's really interesting when you have that lens. And after reading War and Peace, to study history, because Tolstoy has a lot of commentary on history. What are the cause and effects of events? And it was really grounding for me going through this when he talks about, because every now and then he'll kind of pause the story and he talks about the historical events. He gives a little bit of a narrative commentary of why did millions of people across Europe and Russia, parts of Asia, why did millions of people mobilize, either in society and then a lot of them joining the war? Why did multiple countries getting involved? Why did so many people have to die? What was their disagreement between these soldiers and these individual soldiers? What was their disagreement? What caused them to come together and then shoot one another? And when he starts breaking down the squabbles, the pettiness of what most war is, it really makes you sit back and reassess history and reassess events and what are the things that build up to it. Because he said, well, one of the archdukes was offended, a Russian duke was offended, and so he started gathering his army and going to the king, and they, what did he say? I think the historians say that was the reason why Russia joined with Austria and went to war against Napoleon. And he says, is that really the reason why millions of people stood up and came together and says, yes, let's go kill each other. Let's go fight one another. Is that really the reason? So another one, maybe a different group will say, oh, it's because the British. The British were insulting, or the British did this or that. And so these two groups, they had to come together because the tensions were too much, and it was the British was the impetus. Is that really the reason why these young men left their homes and picked up their rifles and obeyed the orders of their generals to go die and to kill? Because the British, oh yes, the British. Is that really the reason? And he goes through and he picks through all these different groups, all these different perspectives that give a different reason, and very drastically different reasons of why the Napoleonic War, two of them in fact, why they happened, what started them, what caused them. And he starts really digging in with this story of the causes and effects of war and peace. What leads us to do the things that we do, that leads nations, millions of people, to do the things that they do conglomerately. This is a powerful lesson, and one that we should definitely use and implement in our homes with our families. Why do we do the things that we do? What are the causes? What are the effects? What are the different events? Looking through our personal histories, looking through our national histories, looking through different nations' histories. What caused that? And look for the multiple perspectives, because they're all right. That's one of Tolstoy's conclusions. I'm not going to give away too much. His last two prologues are brilliant, are fantastic. I almost say if you're really struggling with the book and you don't want to pick it up, or you're having a hard time getting through it, maybe reading the last two prologues and then starting at the beginning and reading through, or wherever you stopped, and put it down and starting there. But only use that as a cheat if you need to. But Em and I, we got together, we did a talk on how to get through these epics, these great classics, these deep classics, but long classics that can be kind of difficult to get through sometimes, but so worth it. So dig into the history. And don't forget one of the most important pieces of history. So we often conglomerate an era or a period or a nation or a people, a society, according to the definition of some great man or woman. Something that kind of embodies the culture. And so as a historian, you kind of have to do that if you're going to do big swaths of history. If you're going to go through American history, if you're going to go through British history, if you're going to go through German history, Russian history, you're dealing with hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, and you're dealing with a lot of people. And so you can't go to each single individual. And so you have to do kind of this umbrella effect, where you conglomerate a lot of them into groups and define them by their general, or define them by their president, or define them by this scientist or musician or this iconic person. And we forget that history is inevitably and inseparably made up of individuals. That a president, a general, this iconic figure isn't iconic without each individual choosing to buy in or to support or to vote into that group, to obey those orders. to vote them in as president, or to join the military, or to accept this type of music. So they do represent a group of society, but we have to remember that those people, that group, is made up of individuals and made up of all this chaotic different choices and progress and pieces and degrees and variants of accepting and rejecting. And we have to remember, as we study history, that we should get the broad picture, but it's really important at some points and sometimes at some areas of history to dig in and get to know the individuals. See, Tolstoy was writing about this huge shifting moment, this huge powerful time in Russian history during the Napoleonic Wars with Alexander as king. And how he chose to share that history, this critical moment of history for Russia. He chose to dig into there and show these events through the eyes of individuals. Not the king, not a general, not even top aristocrats, but these different youth and their families, and just trying to live their lives, just trying to find themselves and find their path and do the best that they can with what they have. And I think that's something pretty spectacular. Hugo's Les Miserables does the same thing. Cervantes does a very similar thing with Don Quixote. He's writing in a very critical point in Spanish history. And what is his message? How does he dig into the rise and fall of the Spanish Empire? All these great storytellers, all these great cultural mentors, they don't go to the top. They go down to the bottom, to these individuals, or to the middle class. And you get to understand, you see the world very differently. You see the generals very differently when they're not put up on the pedestal of being the deciding factor that determines, history is not deterministic. When you start looking and understanding the individuals in any point in time in history, you see a very different history. You see a very different world. How did things happen? Why did things happen? Because the individuals are inseparably connected. And that gives us so much power right here, right now. Especially when freedom and opportunity and choice and education are as widespread and available to more people across more of the world than ever before. We're in a very special time of history where more people have the opportunity to vote and to choose, to support one course of action over another, which is one reason why we see so many different branches and so many different things going on, so many different societal issues. The national governments are having such a hard time controlling and being part of and having their fingers in everything because there are so many things. Minorities are becoming the thing. You can't find majorities anymore. You can, but only because that's kind of how some of the governments and voting works. And so they'll set aside enough of their differences to get together, to get big enough to win an election or something along those lines. But then as soon as that's done, they break out again. And we're just so diverse because of the widespread choice and freedom, prosperity, opportunity that is growing and expanding across the entire world. That's a good thing. See, and Tolstoy's really digging into the human nature effect. That it's impossible. Napoleon isn't the reason that so many Frenchmen fell in line and obeyed the order to a T. That he spoke and they moved mountains. No, that's ridiculous. There's so many different tiers of groups of people that have to participate and step in. There were a lot of Frenchmen who didn't participate and join in. There were a lot from other countries he went conquering that didn't really enjoy and participate. Some of them sort of participate because they didn't want to be killed, either in war or execution or what have you. So there's all sorts of different varying levels and degrees of involvement of this history and what each individual does and how they invest into it. And so we have to recognize that there can be no central planner. There can be no central mastermind that can understand all the intricate, literally the infinite amount of variables and choices that have to go into play here. Where Alexander will say, yes, we should go to war against Napoleon. And then his generals get together and talk about, all right, we're going to go kind of this way, and these guys are going to go this way, this unit's going to go this way. And then you get down, and the captains and sergeants say, okay, well, the general said we're going this way, so we're going to line up. Here's the terrain. And each layer breaks down and gets a little bit more nitty-gritty, gets a little bit more detailed, gets a little bit more specific until you're the soldier right there saying, all right. And you have the sergeants there, and they're giving the orders to fire or to move, and you're kind of, everything's now kind of moving on its own. And it's not Alexander the king. It's not the generals. They only give kind of swathing big umbrella directives, but it's really the individuals who are right there in the trenches with the guns firing and being fired at in the war side. And in peace, where you're right there in the trenches, in the family or in the sitting rooms, where you're right there working with a campaign, or you're sitting there with your family trying to work with a child who's struggling, or with each other where you kind of maybe have a disagreement and your husband and wife are trying to work through an issue or a question. And so whatever the case is, wherever you find yourself, this is understanding this history and the power that the individual has in these choices and this progress and where we're at in the world today in dealing with human nature. You can't have this big, swathing, overarching central mastermind, a social engineer. It just doesn't work. There's too much going on. There's too many needs and too many minorities, too many groups who need what they need. And you can't centralize it because it can't go across and require or force everybody to fall under that one little niche. There are too many individuals. And I love it. Tolstoy says you can start digging into causes and reasons of why certain events happen. And there are as many perspectives and reasons as there are individuals. And not just alive in the event, but he says going into the past. You have to keep going and keep going to see all the different things that have happened for the last 100 years that have been building up and caused and ripple effect and domino effect and led up to this event happening. It's really fascinating. And it's really fun to dig into this thought process as Tolstoy is giving a little bit of these commentaries and then showing it, and you're experiencing it as you're in the trenches, as you're in people's homes, as you're meeting the king of Russia, right? As you meet Napoleon and some of his leaders. It's very fascinating to see the world through all these different perspectives and different angles. And for us to recognize here and now today, this book has so many powerful lessons that are drastically needed right here, right now. We're facing some serious problems that do need to be healed, that need to be changed. And are we going to approach it with an inner ring approach, or are we going to be sound craftsmen about it? Are we going to understand that individuals matter and we make up, we create history? It's not the president, it's not the general, it's not the iconic Hollywood figure, but it's me, it's you. We are way more than these iconic figures. We create their agenda. It is only by we, the people, that big umbrella succeeds. And it's not through the central planning. Now, it can often be through central direction. Sometimes that is good and right and needed. But it is the individuals and all the different groups and conglomerations and configurations and all the infinite different organic flows and changings that make good and right change and progress happen, that allows for healing to happen. Oh man, this book, War and Peace, it's so deep. There's so much there on how to deal in society and how to deal chaos and order. So as we look at the individual, as we look at histories, as we look at events, and realize that I'm just one individual amongst millions and then world into billions of people, how can my one little drop, my one little grain of rice actually make an impact, actually change anything. Sure, if millions or thousands of rice and then water droplets get added into that same little area, then sure, it makes an impact. But what is, if most of the rice is over here and I put one rice over here with three others, how does that work? And we can get pretty hopeless. It can seem pretty gloomy in making a successful change and in gaining progress. And Tolstoy, I think, taught a really important lesson. So this is the fifth lesson. And my first time through it, I missed this, but Emma caught it because she was just finishing up the first half of the book. And Tolstoy, he literally did it. I mean, this is by design. You know that he's doing this on purpose. Because literally, the very half mark, he has this certain exchange between two very prominent characters. And so at this point, I knew I was in for the long run. It was going to be a long book, and so I was just reading, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I'm pretty easy at just kind of laying back and just committing to something. But Emma, coming up to the half point, she started asking the question. I'm so glad she was struggling with this and asking this question and wrestling with it and saying, Tolstoy, what are you doing to us? There are no heroes. Spoiler, there are no heroes in this book. There's some fun characters and there's some people we're rooting for and hoping for, and there's characters that I like, but really, mostly, I just don't like any of them. They're all weak and faulted. They just fall short in so many different ways, in so many different areas. And they had this opportunity, and they kind of took it, and then they fizzled out and wandered away and didn't stick to it. They didn't live their mission. And then this character had another opportunity. So he was going, and then he kind of got selfish and had and so all these characters have so much hope, and then you just let us down, Tolstoy. We don't have any hero to grab onto, to say, oh yes, here's the ideal, here's what we need to be, and he's the one I'm going to hold on to, and we're going to go and save the world. And Tolstoy doesn't give that to us. Up to the halfway point. I mean, this is a long book. This is a big book. And we're halfway through, and we don't have any true heroes. And Tolstoy says, these two characters, one of them says, I'm giving up. I'm hopeless. I can't do it. I can't make the right changes. I can't stick to the changes that I do want to make. I'm just failing. It's not worth it. You shouldn't be my friend. You shouldn't like me. It's hopeless. And Pierre responds with love and support and giving praise and saying, no, you're missing this good quality and you're missing this good quality. And we're only halfway through our lives. When you really think about it, we're only halfway there. How dare you give up now? We have so much ahead of us. We can keep trying. And so when you finish the book and you see how their relationship ends, where they end up, in just a couple more years, really just a handful more years, is really spectacular. It's really special. Guys, look at your life. And you can say, some of us can say, we're halfway there. Some of us maybe a little bit further. Some of us maybe we have way more than half. But to just take that as the principle that it's not over yet. We still have time. We can still grow. We can still learn. We can still progress. We can still serve and love those around us and move our little grain of rice. We can still do something. We can still do a little bit. It's like the starfish. I love that analogy. This gentleman's walking down. A bunch of starfish were washed up on the beach, and every now and then he picks up and throws a starfish, and another guy calls out to him and says, why are you doing that? Do you see how many starfish there are and how little of an impact you're making by just throwing a few back in? It would take days if you were to try to get every single one, and you're just going for a little walk in your morning walk on the beach, and you're only throwing a few. That is ridiculous. You're not making any difference, whatever. And so he bends over, picks up one more, tosses it in, says, well, I made a difference to that one. And we forget that's often enough. That individuals matter. Big statistics matter too. Big sweeping generalities, they matter too. But the reason why statistics matter is because they're made up of individuals. It's really interesting because statistics often hold true. Those generalities often hold true, but once you go into the individual, the statistic no longer holds true. You cannot predict what the individual will do. in any situation. And statistics have also been shown to be able to change over time. If you have high crime rates or high selfish rates, guess what? You can go back through time and you can find where they're the opposite, where you have a high serving and leadership rates and low crime rates. You can find those. Which means that if we do our little bit right here, right now, and recognize that this individual and you individual, for one, are worth it, and two, we're only halfway there. We still have time. That lesson that Tolstoy shares with us says, yes, we have a whole bunch of these youth and these different families, these different generals and lieutenants and captains, where we have a lot of weakness. We have a lot of shortcomings. But hold on, don't put the book down yet. Hold on. We still have another half of the book. And we're going to keep struggling. We're going to keep striving. We're going to keep falling down and losing and failing. But we're going to keep getting back up. And we're going to keep trying, because those characters in this story who do that with all their weaknesses and with all their failings, the times when they really mess up big, if they keep getting up and keep striving, you probably didn't even notice if I did that, but I thought that was pretty funny, combining the two words. But if they keep going down this path, if they keep taking up the gauntlet, they will succeed. They will get there. They will make a difference. They will make an impact. And they can become great. The individual matters. So I love that. Halfway through the book, literally the closing, halfway through the book. And she's all flustered and says, I'm not worth it. I can't do it. And he says, because just before that, he was thinking of his own failings and his own problems and issues. And he says, no, I care about you and I care about me. We're only halfway there. If we keep picking ourselves up, we still have time. We still have time. We can keep going. We can keep working. We can get through these down times. We can get through these hardships. And we can just keep trying. Oh, I loved that. What a mentoring moment. What a powerful, powerful piece. And lesson 6 builds right off of that. Because Pierre, he says this to her. And so they have this spiritual moment, this powerful moment of realization, a little bit of enlightenment. They're kind of both downtrodden and really sad and broken. But that's often when we get to pick up the most and become and really grab the bull by the horns, or get back on the horse, get back on the bike and keep going again. You're sad and you're broken, says, man, I'm sorry I failed. I'm sorry I messed up. But we're going to keep going. We're going to keep trying. And we are going to win. We are going to make it if we just keep going. So he leaves her. He gets in his carriage and is trying to decide, because for this first half of a lot of his life, he would go, he'd go gamble or go hang out with his friends. He'd go drinking or do some, he'd go out to town and go party or something, go to the club. And this time he's sitting there thinking and just coming off of that conversation and recognizing the gravity and the specialness of what just happened. And what he was sharing with her and what he realized internally as he was speaking it to her. He gives the order to the carriage driver. He says, take me home. Take me home. Tolstoy has a lot to say about home, about family. I think he argues and he sets it up, especially once you get into his other books. He really reverences family and recognizes the power and the value that family is, that it lays the foundation for great souls. And so he goes home instead of going to town and gallivanting around. He goes home, and the book, the whole series ends, the last few chapters in the first prologue. When you have a book this big, you need multiple prologues, right? Or not prologues, sorry, that's the beginning, epilogues. I've meant epilogues this whole time. So the two epilogues, erase what I said earlier, go back and rewrite that. There's one prologue, and that's also really good. But the two epilogues is what I meant. So his first epilogue deals in the family of these young characters that we've been following that are struggling and striving and trying to get there and giving up halfway through. And some of them were married and get divorced, and some of them aren't married yet. And so they're all going through these ups and downs of trying to discover themselves and trying to understand what is their role, what is their purpose, and how do they do it successfully. Life is hard. People are complex. Society is hard and complex. And the laws of nations are hard and complex. There's a lot of war and a lot of peace going on at every level of humanity. And Tolstoy ends it by giving examples of these characters that we've grown to really love and to know. And we get to see them still in their individual states of their strangenesses, being quirky and being who they are, but being a very different and higher and greater type of who they are. It's just so special. Because again, you see them and you say, oh, that's still annoying about you, but man, are you worth it. And man, are you great. Look at relationship, this husband and wife relationship. That's just astounding. That's worth setting up as an ideal. That's what I meant. To pattern after, to use examples after, to say, all right, I want to strive to be a little bit more like you guys. Again, not to copycat it, because that never works, but to emulate it, to learn from it. Again, to use them as an ideal. And then you get the other two characters who end up getting married together and having family together. And you see how they approach family. And it's very different. These two families look very different, but they have some very common themes, and they have very common grounding aspects that make them happy, that make them full of joy. And it brings them together as they've learned to communicate with one another, as they've learned to rely on one another, as they've learned to forgive each other for their weaknesses and their faults, and as they have recognized their true inner genius, their true excellence, and the work and the price that they paid to become who they are, and then to come together and to become even better because of each other and with each other. It's just so special going through that whole arc and seeing the struggles and seeing the strifes and remembering that hundreds of pages earlier, Pierre is saying, we're only halfway there. Keep trying, keep going, because if you do, this is where you end. You have a home that gives you confidence, that gives you peace, that gives you happiness and joy. There might be conflict and craziness going out around you externally, but internally you've found your peace, and you're able to deal with the chaos. And the internal chaos just isn't quite as chaotic. It's not quite as warlike anymore, because you've been through the process and you know how to heal. You know how to ask for forgiveness. You know how to get better and to progress. This, for me, was one of the most impactful lessons that I learned from War and Peace, was this grounding aspect of family, of being a sound craftsman, of what these different couples went through and what they became, because they stuck to the journey, they trusted the process, and they just kept following through. Every time they made a mistake, they got up better. They stuck to it just enough. Again, they still have faults. They still have weaknesses. They're still not the iconic hero. But in this way, where Tolstoy took the time to write real people with real strengths and weaknesses, just like you and me, where we are a complex mixture of strengths and weaknesses, of victories and failures, and what it looks like when we just keep going, when we keep trusting the process, believing in ourselves and believing in those around us. How great we can become. So the family and home is a powerful foundational piece through Tolstoy's War and Peace. And the seventh lesson, when you have that foundation, it makes it a lot easier to do the seventh lesson. But through all these characters, we see them struggling and striving to live their missions, to discover what their life's purpose is, and then to do good to the people around them. Does it change the war? No. But it sure changes a lot of individuals' lives. And And it sure does make a positive impact. And it starts to ripple out quite a lot to the rest of Russia, to the culture of Russia, and into Europe. Whether most of these people know their names or not, most of them will not know. And yet, they began to change the world. They began to shift the course of history because they were doing what was theirs to do. And others around them, because of that, were doing what was theirs to do. This is what living mission looks like. A lot of weakness and failure. A lot of asking for forgiveness. A lot of trying and seeking and wandering. And if mission were some railroad tracks, we'd cross it. Again and again, we say, oh, here it is, and we can follow it for a little while, and then we kind of wander and get off it again. But this book is so powerful, very special, in showing what it is to discover one's mission, and then to dedicate one's life to pursuing it, to understanding what it looks like for me personally, individually, and what it looks like to continue to learn to heal as you develop the skills you need, as you work with those around you to truly become great, to be able to live and fulfill your mission. This book is such a powerful pattern of what that process looks like, of what it means to trust the process of seeking out good, great, the universe, God, and to stick to it. The seventh lesson of the whole journey, going from beginning, from middle to end, understanding that our lives is a whole journey, that mission is a process, that history is a process, and it's only made up of individuals. It's a very powerful, where you can see very specifically and minutely, as well as very broadly and expansively, when we have the whole picture in mind. War and Peace is a very special classic. Oh, I loved this book. I absolutely loved this book. It was a bit to get through it. Even in times when I loved it and it was great and I was learning a whole bunch and taking lots of notes, there were still times I had to set aside and read something else, and it took me a little while, and I had to push myself to pace it and to keep going and getting through it and finishing it out in a timely manner that I wanted to do it. But I am so grateful because it literally has changed how I live my daily life. It has literally changed how I homeschool my children, how I communicate and connect with my wife. It changes how I look at history, both my own family history, as well as world history. I see Russia differently. I see Europe differently. I see Africa, Asia, I see the world differently because of the mentoring I got from Tolstoy. I hope you take these 7 lessons and are able to use them, implement them in your homeschool today. But then I really, really hope that you'll go straight to the source. You'll go to War and Peace. You'll go to Tolstoy, and you'll get your pen out, and you'll take notes of different lessons that you get of how you can homeschool, how you can live your mission, how you can get that whole picture, how you can strengthen and build your family, how you can recognize war and peace within yourself and in the world around you, and how to approach it as a sound craftsman and not in an inner ring. And finding value in each individual. I hope you'll go through and be mentored by Tolstoy, argue with him, disagree with him, agree with him. Throw the book sometimes and say, we're halfway there and there's no heroes. Experience this book because you will live another life reading this book. You gain so much wisdom and depth when you really dig in and think about and discuss great classics.